With Los Angeles County District Attorney Nathan Hochman, who is the new district attorney following George Gascon's departure. Mr. Hochman, how are you today?
I'm very well, thank you.
So, can you talk a little bit about your background and what makes you qualified to be the district attorney for Los Angeles County?
So I'm a lifelong Angelino. I was born here, grew up here, educated here, married now almost 32 years, raised my three kids who are now in their 20s here in Los Angeles. I had the chance to go to school back east and then came back to California for law school. When I got done with that, I went right to the bench here in Los Angeles, the federal bench. I was a law clerk and went right to the U.S. Attorney's Office as a federal prosecutor. Did the whole range of cases from drug cases, gang cases. I went after money launderers. I did police corruption cases. We went after deputy sheriffs who were stealing drugs, guns, and money from drug dealers. We convicted 26 of them. I had the chance even to run the environmental crimes unit and do public corruption cases. Thereafter, I went eventually to the U.S. Department of Justice, and as it was a presidential nomination and a U.S. Senate confirmation as the Assistant Attorney General running the U.S. Department of Justice's tax division. Did that for a little over a year, came back to L.A., and I've been a defense attorney. Actually, I've represented individuals against the state governments, federal governments. Did that for about 24 years. So as DA, I'm the first DA in history to actually be both a prosecutor, did that for just under 10 years, and a defense attorney. And I've done that for over 24 years, which gives me a fairly unique perspective on the criminal justice system. I'm the first DA who ever personally prosecuted a law enforcement officer, yet I went ahead and, with my brother, co-founded the LA Sheriff's Foundation. So again, I've worked with police officers and really good ones, and I've prosecuted really bad ones. So I have that as a perspective as well. And hopefully, in having led large organizations in the public and private sphere, because in the private sphere I also was the head of two major international law firms' government investigations practices, it gives me the ability to lead this large office. It's the largest local prosecuting office in the United States, with over 2,100 employees. About 800 or so are prosecutors, 200 are investigators, the rest are support staff. It's got about a $500 million budget and does 180,000 criminal cases every single year, representing over 10 million people in the county. That's 88 cities, 125 unincorporated areas. It's big, but it's an amazing place, not only to grow up, but to live in, and now to be the DA in charge of these prosecutions.
So, a lot of people had issues with George Gascon's policies that they viewed as progressive and soft on crime. For Black and brown communities in Los Angeles, a lot of people knew and understood that George Gascon's approach was important and needed to address the institutional racism and bias that has plagued Los Angeles for decades. And so I wanted to ask you, in terms of your perspective on the criminal justice system in Los Angeles, do you feel that there are institutional biases that impact the way Black and brown people are sentenced in Los Angeles County?
To answer that question, let me tell you what my philosophy of prosecution is. I reject extreme policies. I reject an extreme policy of mass incarceration that doesn't focus on the facts and the law, but had as sort of a policy agenda to just fill the prisons. But I also reject the decarceration extreme policies of my predecessor, Gascon, that said that we're going to predetermine that certain crimes and certain criminals would not be prosecuted without looking at the facts and the law. My philosophy is I call it the hard work middle, or the hard middle, because you got to do the work. Extreme policies are lazy and they're reckless. If you have to look at each case individually, you got to look at the individual defendant and their background, the crime committed, and the impact on the victim to determine who the true threats are to our public safety, and those are often the repeat offenders who need to be behind bars and the ones that aren't. The first-time nonviolent offender still has to pay a debt back to society, if they violate society's laws. But that's where non-prison alternatives come to play. Community service, restitution, pay it back if you stole something, or if you got a serious drug addiction that got you to do the crime, we'll give you a diversion program that gives you a choice. You can go to prison, or you can do an 18-month, one day at a time rehab program that if you succeed will give you a certificate and wipe that crime off your record. That's the hard middle, balanced, proportional approach. Now, when I apply that approach to racism, yes, of course, there are certain institutional racism that has existed in the past and parts of it exist today. Fortunately, in the last several years, the state legislature has given us 2 additional laws to help fight against that type of racism. Both explicit racism, that's an example where some officers would say, I'm going to go after that person because of their race, but also implicit racism, where they don't actually say it out loud, but that's actually what ends up happening. So there's something called the Racial Justice Act that has come down in the last several years. And it allows defense attorneys to ask the DA's office for discovery, for information and documents showing either explicit or implicit racism in the charging of certain people for certain crimes. And if they find that this pattern, implicitly or explicit evidence, they can bring an issue up to the judge to seek to actually dismiss the charge or even throw out the entire case. So the DA's office has had to have been and is very responsive to get that information over to the defense attorney, but more importantly, as the cases are being initiated, to be very conscious of explicit and implicit racism in making any type of charging decisions. There's also another state legislative act that's coming into play this year called the Race-Blind Charging Act. What that is insisting is that for certain crimes, you actually strip out the racial identifiers for a witness, for a target, for a suspect, for anything in the police report. You actually use an algorithm to redact them. Then you give that redacted report to a prosecutor and you say, make your decision on filing. Are you going to file against a certain person or on a certain crime? Then what happens is after that decision's made, they reintroduce all the information and they say, let's see if you make the same decision. If you do, you proceed on. If you don't, you got to write a memo on what about the racial identifiers got you to change your mind on a particular decision. Then all that information is made available to a defense attorney if the case ultimately gets charged. While this is not necessarily a full solution to every part of institutional racism, it is an attempt by the system to identify the explicit and implicit racial bias in the system and do something about it.
Under Gascon's leadership, we saw his office look into wrongfully imprisoned individuals, have their case reexamined, and there were a number of people who were released under his leadership. Will your office also make a commitment into looking into people who were wrongfully imprisoned in Los Angeles and releasing them?
Not only will we look into it and continue the excellent work of the Conviction Review Unit, but let me give you an example of what we've actually done. I came into office on December 3rd. I had heard that there were 2 individuals that had been in prison at that point 17 years. And information had come to light to show that they actually didn't commit the crimes. And these were crimes of murder for which they had been convicted 17 years before. So on December 16th, which was a Monday, I had a presentation made to me by the Conviction Review Unit on that case. The difference between me and my predecessor is that I also had the original prosecutor show up at that presentation because there are new evidence that come forward 15 years later where 2 different individuals from the same gang had now confessed to the murder in a way that made us lose confidence in the conviction. By having the original prosecutor there, I was able to get his input where he ultimately said yes, he would have doubt about the conviction based on the new evidence. I then went ahead and 2 days later believed that these people should get out of prison. And now it's December 18th. I wanted them out before Christmas. They shouldn't spend another Christmas behind bars if they didn't belong there. But I found out that the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, the prisons, would take about 10 days to get them out. Then I found out that the judge was going out of town that following Monday, December 23rd, for 2 weeks. So I asked the judge, I said, Judge, can you have the hearing 2 days later, December 20th? He said, I'll have a hearing at 1:30, don't be late. I said, okay. Then I turned to our Bureau of Investigation. I said, is there any chance we can send a whole bunch of investigators who are sworn law enforcement officers to the 2 different prisons, because one was actually a female driver and the other was the purported male shooter, 2 different prisons in the center of California, pick them up at 5 a.m., drive them to be in court by 1:30 that Friday, December 20th, to make the hearing. They said, look, you're the DA. If you want us to do it, we can do it. And then we've never done it before. I said, go ahead and do it. So they went, they picked these people up at 5 a.m., they drove expeditiously, and sure enough, at 1 o'clock, they showed up in court, and these 2 individuals who had not seen their families outside of a jail or prison in 17 years. The young male was 15 when he when he originally got arrested. The young female was 20 and pregnant at the time. So they greeted their families outside the courtroom. We then went inside the courtroom, and I made an appearance on behalf of the people. And the judge looked at me and said, well, this is interesting. I said, well, why is it interesting? He said, because we haven't had a district attorney make an appearance in a hearing like this ever. And I thought, why not? Because justice takes many forms. Very often, I will make press conferences and have releases talking about arrests, convictions, sentences, but justice can often involve setting aside a conviction. And that day, that's exactly what justice did. Justice set aside that conviction, and 3 hours later, they were free. And that was a great day for justice, just as much as it would be if I convicted someone who deserved a conviction.
How do you feel about trying youth offenders as adults?
So I think youth offenders, generally, the general rule should be youth offenders are tried through the juvenile justice system. That's where they belong. But there are exceptions to that, where effectively a youth offender has committed an adult crime. You know, if a 17-year-old goes on a shooting spree and kills a whole lot of people, that would be the type of case where you'd have to seriously go through all the factors and consider a transfer into adult court. So unlike my predecessor, who for most of his term had a blanket rule saying never would that actually be considered, and then once he removed the blanket rule, did it so infrequently, it effectively was a never, I asked the people who have the most experience, and I'm talking about people literally who each have 20 to 30 years of experience dealing with juvenile cases and their bosses, so collectively we're talking hundreds of years of experience, to make the call. And again, the default is that juveniles are treated in juvenile court. But we're not going to pretend that the facts and the law don't exist just because I have a political disposition to have it that way. I go back to the facts and the law in each case. Treat them all individually. This is that hard middle approach. And yeah, we'll make the calls where appropriate to try a juvenile as an adult. It's a difficult decision. I mean, I have been to 17 different prisons across this country. You don't want to ever be in a prison, especially an adult prison. But there are situations where that is, unfortunately, the result that will be had in a case.
What is the current plan for LA County's juvenile halls that have been deemed unsuitable and were supposed to close? Can you speak at all about what the plan is for our juvenile justice, our juvenile halls?
So there's the major juvenile hall that holds some of the most violent juveniles is a hall called Los Padrinos. To give you an example, Los Padrinos holds 259 individuals. 42% of the juveniles there, generally between the ages of 16 and 24, are there for murder. There's another big percentage there for attempted murder, for violent sexual offenses, and the like of very serious crimes. The problem with Los Padrinos was actually, interestingly, a staffing shortage. That the probation office that's in charge of staffing Los Padrinos couldn't come up with enough probation officers to adequately staff each shift involved in Los Padrinos. And they were appropriately cited by the reviewing authorities for having these staffing shortages. It is my understanding after hearing discussions involving the chief probation officer that he is doing everything in his power to fix these staffing shortages. There's going to be upcoming court hearings on this issue. We'll find out if he's able to remedy these deficiencies in Los Padrinos. If he isn't, then they're going to have to deal with the next step, which is what to do if you have to shut down Los Padrinos. I'm certainly hoping he's able to remedy this problem and properly staff Los Padrinos so it can continue on as a juvenile detention facility for this population of juveniles.
Has there been any discussion on plans to address abuse of minors by staff at the juvenile halls?
Here's the message for anyone who has abused a minor at a juvenile hall. I'm going to find you, I'm going to arrest you, I'm going to prosecute you, and I'm going to punish you to the maximum extent of the law. And if there's any juvenile who's suffered this victimization at the hands of the people who are supposed to be in charge of properly caring for them, please notify law enforcement. Make sure that you do not sit on this information, and we will act on this information.
What programs or other creative opportunities can we see from your office to sway youth before they commit violent crimes?
So I believe a district attorney actually has 3 roles in the criminal justice system. And I'll call them the before, the during, and the after roles. Before is you got to reach the kids. You got to reach that population that could very well make some bad decisions that'll end them up in the criminal justice system before they make these bad decisions. So we already, the DA's office has a program called Project LEAD in a number of the school districts in the 5th grade. My goal is to expand that program into the middle schools and the high schools, to both bring prosecutors, bring law enforcement, bring people who've been in prison to go talk to the kids and explain to them the consequences of what bad choices look like, and also hopefully offer them role models of what good choices can look like and what their lives could look like going forward if they make those good choices. The during is what we've talked about before, which is this hard middle approach to proportional accountability once you get in the system. But the after approach is also important. I want to basically go into the prisons, and I want to see if we can give prisoners skill sets so that when they come out, they don't feel the recidivism rate, which is over 50%. What does that mean? That half the people that leave prison will commit new crimes and be back in prison having victimized new victims within 2 years of release. That is a tragic figure. I support programs like The Last Mile. The Last Mile teaches coding skills to prisoners in prison, helps them get a certificate, helps them get their first job when they get out. And the recidivism rate for the Last Mile's graduates, once they get out, less than 1%. Proving that if you can give a prisoner a skill set so that they have something productive to do when they get out, they're not going to turn back to a life of crime. They're going to want to be productive for them and their family and their friends. It's incredibly smart money, well invested by the system, because the Last Miles program is about $6,000 an inmate, and it costs about $128,000 per inmate to house them for a year. So whether it's compassion or just economic smarts or a combination, investing in prisoners so that they can do something else besides commit crime when they get out is a smart investment, and investing in young people so they don't commit any crimes in the first place is additionally a very smart investment.
You recently did a press conference about crime that was happening in areas impacted by the recent wildfires, about people that were basically going to people's homes while they were evacuated to loot people's properties. 2 of the individuals that were caught and arrested doing this actually had priors and are going to be sentenced under California's 3 strikes law that was recently voted on by voters in November to be brought back. And so I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts about 3 strikes coming back to California?
So the three strikes law was originally passed in 1994 by over 70% on a proposition. It was also voted by the state legislature by an overwhelming majority. So it's been on the books for over 30 years. It's been challenged many times. The courts have affirmed it. What it does, and it got actually modified in 2012 with another proposition, and here's what it does. It only goes after violent and serious crimes. So in other words, the first strike is you commit a violent and serious crime, you get convicted, you go to jail or prison, that's strike one. But that didn't slow you down, because you're back. You commit another violent and serious crime. You get convicted, you go to jail or prison, that's strike two. If that doesn't stop you from committing crime, now you're on the third strike. Again, it has to be another violent or serious crime. A non-serious, non-violent crime doesn't count. But the idea is that you need to send a message to the people who are going back and hurting people, because each one of these crimes has a trail of victims in their wake. To say, look, if you're going to continue this type of destructive conduct in our society, the price of doing it is going to continually go up, to the point where the third strike offense can result in a prison sentence from 25 years to life. Now, ultimately, a judge has to make that call. A judge can even strike a strike if the judge thinks it's inappropriate. So the prosecutor begins that process by charging it, but a judge obviously can weigh in, and ultimately a jury has to make a finding if it goes to a trial. But it's designed to go after the worst of the worst in the system, the ones that the first two strikes didn't deter them from committing their criminal conduct, and they're back for harming people again with another violent and serious crime.
What is your message to Black and brown people in Los Angeles County in terms of you being the new district attorney for Los Angeles County?
So my message isn't a Black or brown message. It's a Los Angelino message, because it's to all the residents of Los Angeles County. And it's this. People ask me how I will measure success in the next 4 years. Let me tell you how I won't measure it. If all I've done is fill the prisons to the breaking point, I've actually failed. It's actually the failure of the criminal justice system. The truly effective measure of the criminal justice system is, can you deter criminals from committing the crimes in the first place, thus saving a whole lot of victims in the process? How do you do that? The way I believe you do that is that you consistently, fairly, and impartially enforce the laws and make sure there are real consequences on the other side of the line. And you make sure that this idea of what's out there is known to the criminals. So if they want to go ahead and test the line or cross the line, they understand in advance what the consequences look like, and you do it consistently. And the idea is, if you can do it consistently and put that message out, that you're not bluffing, they're not going to create exceptions, that people will eventually learn, okay, that line is a pretty firm line, and then to be deterred from committing that criminal act in the first place. So that's my message. It's my message to all as to what I will do. Again, I welcome feedback. If people think that I'm not enforcing laws strict enough, I'm enforcing them too strictly, if they got complaints with anyone in the process on how criminal justice is being carried out, you bring that right to me in the district attorney's office. Make sure I'll listen. My goal is, I don't come in with the idea that I have every answer to every problem out there, just the opposite. My dad used to tell me that, look, you're born with 2 ears and 1 mouth. It means you got to listen twice as much as you speak. That's my goal. I'm out there to listen, and once I listen, I'll do my best to act smartly, sensibly, and with some common sense. So thank you for this opportunity to speak with you.
And thank you so much for your time. One last thing, do you guys still have openings for joining advisory committees and things like that?
So we actually sent an application out for about a month to join a variety of advisory committees. The application deadline has passed. We're in the process of interviewing now over 160 people who've applied. However, this is not something that is etched in stone. We will periodically, as people move in and out of these committees, we'll be looking for new people. So if you're interested in serving in an advisory committee for the DA's office, please reach out, go through our website, put your name in, and even if we can't get to you this time around, I'm sure at some point in the future we will.